it's not true that all you need is love. We also need to work with what I call power and what I call justice. But that drive to not be, it's like, it's that drive to not to be the same, but to recognize how we're part of something with others is, I think, a drive that almost everybody has. There's many obstacles to it, political and psychological and familial and economic and class and race obstacles. But if you can remove those obstacles, people are so happy. And so that's what love's got to do with it.
Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Adam Kahane, who is a master at facilitating groups and helping them come to an agreement. Where do you need to work with others in your life that could benefit from creating an agreement? Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and create harmony to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. Our quote today comes from the book and is from the Spanish poet Antonio Machado. Walker, there is not a path. The path is made by walking. Are you a trailblazer? Or do you follow the path you've been told to follow? A well-worn path. It's kind of mundane and boring. Not really what you want out of life. Too often we follow someone else's idea of what we should do. Maybe it's a parent or a teacher or your employer. We do, however, get to pick. And sometimes we forget the choice is ours. The best lives are made when you create your own path. Last week's action step was to pick a book and read it from your shelf, just 10 pages, and find one action step you could take based on what you read. I've got to tell you, this is a game changer. And as we said, small steps add up over time. If you're connected to me on LinkedIn or Facebook, you've probably seen the books behind me. I try to get through about 4 books per month. It's a game changer in learning from others and taking steps. Books have helped me to achieve the life I have. They're one of the cheapest ways to learn and improve. The hard part is finding the best books to learn from and picking your learning path. Each book speaks to you in the moment. And if you're rereading them over time, each time you read them, you might get a different message. Today we're going to talk about facilitating. Can you imagine facilitating agreements with people who want to shoot each other? Our guest Adam has done just that, and he has a lot of wisdom to share with us. We live in a polarized world, and the solution is not to scream our viewpoints, but to understand and listen, and to find a way forward. I have to say I'm disappointed with our politicians on both sides for not leading by example. The news and social media don't help either. We end up in an echo chamber. Adam Kahane is director of Reos Partners, an organization that helps people move forward together on their most important and intractable ideas. For 30 plus years, he has facilitated teams of executives, politicians, philanthropists, generals, guerillas, civil servants, trade unionists, community activists, clergy, and artists in more than 50 countries in every part of the world. His work and methods have been praised by Nobel Peace Prize winners Nelson Mandela and Juan Manuel Santos, which he shares in his newest book, Facilitating Breakthrough: How to Remove Obstacles, Bridge Differences, and Move Forward Together. Let's meet Adam and learn from him. Welcome to Rich Your Soul, Adam Kahane. It's great to have you join us today.
Thank you, Rocky.
I'm excited to learn from you today. As always, we like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
Well, first time I ever even thought about that question, but I guess the answer is school, not at all. The little bit I know about money, I learned from my father and from imitating him, and I handle money in my life more or less the way he handled it in his.
So you were, I guess, lucky to have a father who had financial knowledge, or was that not the case?
No, it was the case. I come from a middle-class family in Montreal, and my father was a businessman, and I don't think had any special financial knowledge, but he knew enough to save and balance his bank account and pay attention to his portfolio. And that's pretty well all I do.
You know, it sounds so simple, and yet so many people struggle with this.
Well, it helps when you have enough. I mean, we had enough money growing up, and I've had enough money in my life. So, and I don't have super extravagant taste. So it isn't very hard if your income exceeds your outgo. I guess with a lot of people, it's the opposite. And then, of course, it's much harder.
Correct. And it doesn't matter what your income is, because there are plenty of people with six-figure incomes whose outgo exceeds their income.
Well, I once had a financial advisor visit me when my wife and I were living in a one-bedroom apartment in Boston, and he just looked around and said, "I think you're going to be okay. I wouldn't worry about it." And I think what he was trying to say is normally when he goes to homes of his clients, they're obviously living way beyond their means, and he was going to struggle to help them. And he said, "You're going to be okay." And we have.
Well, congratulations on that and taking those steps. So one of the things that we talked about just before we hit record was that you are living your ultimate life. Can you share, how did this come to be?
Yes, I say that not with pride, but with a feeling of how fortunate I am. I grew up in Montreal. I studied physics, economics. I got a job in a corporation, Shell. Was good in school. And when I was exactly 30 years old, I had an experience, a very unexpected and unplanned experience, is that two academics in South Africa, this was 1991 was just in the middle of the transition from apartheid to democracy. Two academics in South Africa wanted to use the Shell planning methodology, and they asked if Shell could send somebody to facilitate these meetings. And as I was the youngest and most expendable member of my department, I was sent. And to make a long story short, when I got there, I found that the group they had brought together was not just people from the university, not just their friends and colleagues, but was people from across all of South African society, black and white, opposition and establishment, left and right, academics, business people, political change after decades of oppression and violence and conflict. And I found that I could be helpful in that context, that things I knew how to do were really useful. And that was a great experience. And yeah, I ended up leaving Shell and moving to South Africa and marrying the organizer of the project, altogether a successful project. But the part of that I consider so fortunate wasn't the event as such, but that I was lucky enough to find pretty early on what it was that I was good at, that was enjoyable and useful, and I could make a living at. And some years later, a friend of mine said, the thing about gifts, Adam, is that there's no point in being proud of your gift. That doesn't make any sense. A gift, by definition, is something given to you, and it's not about being proud of it. The issue with gifts is you've got to use them. So I have a gift, or I have some gifts. For example, I express myself very clearly. I know exactly where I got that. I got it from my father. I used to be very proud of being such a clear speaker. And then one of my colleagues came over to my house when my father was still alive and said, "Man, you talk just like your father." So this is an example. I have certain gifts, and overdone gifts are a problem. So I'm very organized. I'm very rational. I'm very objective. These are helpful things in what I had to do in South Africa and what I've been doing ever since. If you take them too far, they're a problem. An overdone strength is a weakness. So, you have to watch out for that. But that's what I mean. I consider that I'm living my ultimate life, not that everything's going well, or that I'm happy all the time, or that I don't have normal issues, but just in the sense that pretty early on in my life, I figured out something that I was good at, that I could earn a living at, and that was useful. And what more do you want? What more do you want in life than that?
And that's so true. I think another gift is that you continue to listen to your father. He taught you money, you listened. He taught you how to speak, you listened.
Well, I mean, it's the number of things I agreed to learn from my father is a short list, and I had as many, as many issues with my father as anybody does, or as any man does. But yeah, I mean, I think one of the best things that ever happened to me is when he was in his final years, passed away about 10 years ago, our relationship changed completely, and as I grew up and as he became weaker, all the resistance I had to him evaporated, and the best years of our relationship were his final years, when in certain ways I took care of him. So it was, in that sense, a happy ending to a normally conflictual father-son relationship.
That's interesting. I always say to people, be careful how you treat your kids when they're young, because that is how they will treat you when you are old. Mm. And so you're teaching your kids how to behave, and make sure you do a good job, because one day, I mean, the reality is we all will get old. Yeah. And either we're going to die or we're probably going to need some help. And family and creating those relationships and having good relationships goes a long way to helping at that point.
And for me, that I agree with you. And the additional thing is it can change, and it can sometimes, we get a graceful end to our surprisingly.
And I think our relationships do change. I have a very different relationship with my kids at every kind of age capacity. Mm. And I think that will continue to evolve. As they get older, our relationship continues to change. So I kind of had the opposite problem from you. I knew what my gifts were as a kid. As a teenager, I knew that looking at spreadsheets and figuring out numbers and doing that was something I was really good at. The problem was I couldn't figure out how to make money at it for most of my life. And I kind of went a different direction and just struggled to make that leap back until I finally did. So doing that early and figuring it out and then figuring out how to use it to serve the world, I definitely think is definitely a gift, and it's definitely something that is worthwhile. Is there something in particular that helps people to figure out their gifts and then match it with what the world needs and is willing to pay for?
Well, I don't know. It happened to me in a certain sense quite by accident. I mean, I've seen these books and articles on figuring this stuff out, but my life, at least in this respect, has been quite unplanned. In fact, in a way, what happened to me in South Africa was accidental or synchronistic. I had been up to then, and still am now, if you ask any of my colleagues, a real know-it-all. I like to have the answer to everything. I like to show people I'm right and smart, and that's how I was trained in university and in my first jobs. And when I went to South Africa that first time in 1991, for some reason, I was in a different frame of mind. Partly, I was very busy with my shell work, and so I didn't really have time to become an expert on South Africa. I mean, I was an expert in energy futures, but I really didn't know much about South Africa. And so I didn't know. I hardly knew anything at all. And secondly, I didn't know these people I was going to work with, except that I knew that they were amazing people, that they were people who in one way or another had spent their whole lives trying to make the country better. Some of them, had been in prison or exile or underground. But so I came there with what was for me a very unusual orientation, which is an orientation of respect and humility and not knowing. And in retrospect, I can say that's the perfect orientation for the work that I needed to do there and what I've been doing ever since. That's 100% the right attitude if you're trying to help people move forward together, which is what a facilitator does. I remember one of the members of that South African team saying to me afterwards, Adam, when we first met you, we couldn't believe that anybody could be so ignorant. We were certainly trying to manipulate us. But when we realized you actually didn't know anything, that's when we decided to trust you. So by accident, I fell into the perfect orientation. And I think it was that synchronicity, that openness that allowed me to be, it was obvious to them. I wasn't trying to make them do anything or convince them of anything or tell them the answer. I was there to try to help. And in spite of my ignorance and awkwardness and youth, they accepted that and it worked quite well. And that openness also allowed me to be open to to this amazing country that was going through this momentous change and to this whole new way of working that I'd never even heard of before, and to meeting Dorothy. So it was just, I guess I've never thought about it this way, but I guess the answer to your question would be, you need a certain amount of openness to recognize it when it comes through the door. Because if you're all busy thinking and analyzing and holding on and defending yourself, then you're not going to notice when your vocation is in front of you.
And you have to be receptive for that. It sounds like when you went there, you didn't have any agenda or preconceived notions of a outcome. And because of that, you probably could listen to what everybody was saying and help them to listen to each other and understand what the other people were looking for and wanting. To be heard is something that's difficult in this world. Everyone's too busy with what they're hearing. And actually, there was an example of that in the book. So this is from when you were at Shell. You said you sat down beside Vander Huygen while he was interviewing an executive. And afterwards, you compared notes. And you were shocked to see how much of what the executive has said had not been heard because you were distracted by your own reactions, judgments, projections. Listening is simple, but not easy. Can you expound on that?
Yeah. So I think you're right in in how you introduce this, that it does have to do with openness and receptivity. And in that case, I was focused on the process, not on the content. Or I was focusing on helping them do what they were trying to do rather than tell them what the answer was. So that's what facilitation is. But yes, you're right. I think what you've just said is the most important thing, or at least the first thing. And yes, my boss at Shell, my big teacher in this work, was a man named Kees van der Heijden, and he was an exceptional listener. And he was very, strict and rational and demanding of his subordinates. And we loved him and followed him, and he was effective in his work because in everything he did, he was obviously just trying to serve. In this case, or in the example you mentioned, be of service to the clients, which were the Shell executives, and in the particular work we were doing at that time, trying to understand what it was about the world that they were really trying to understand, so that we could do our planning work accordingly. So yes, the the problem is that most people don't listen at all. They're not listening. They're reloading. They're waiting. I'm waiting for your mouth to stop moving so that I can go back to telling you the truth about the way things are. And we have to escape from that downloading mode where we just say the same thing over and over. We have to escape from this idea that we know the truth. Starting our sentences explicit or implicitly with the phrase, the truth is. That's a big thing because I think most people spend most of the time starting every sentence, aloud or not, with the truth is, and not listening to other people. So I do think that is the first and most basic step, which is to switch from the truth is to in my opinion. It just signaling, when I say in my opinion, I'm just putting a little signal in that this is what I think about things, and I'm going to tell it to you, but I'm not pretending it's the truth. It's my opinion, and maybe as we discuss it, I'll change my mind about things. I used to have a colleague in South Africa, a businessman named Louis van der Merwe, and he used to tell our clients, put in my opinion at the beginning of the sentence, and if that doesn't work, try in my humble opinion. And it was a joke, but it was really helpful because just that little bit of distance between me and what I'm saying is what creates the beginning of openness to, I do have thoughts about this, but I'm interested in learning more.
I like that, in my opinion. And it also takes you off the hook, right? Because if what you're saying is far from the truth, you won't, I guess, look as foolish because you're like, I didn't realize that. It kind of softens everything and it kind of covers you as well.
And it says you can attack this idea. You're not attacking me. Bill Isaacs uses this metaphor that it's like suspending your idea in front of you on a string. So it's not me, it's my idea. It's an idea that I'm holding or I'm suspending, and you can attack it and you can question it, and we can both look at it from different angles. Maybe at the end of the conversation, I'll think the same thing, but maybe because I suspended it. So it's like that expression, suspending judgment. Doesn't mean in the end you're not going to make a judgment, make a decision. Many times you have to, but you're just going to suspend it for 5 minutes or an hour and see, are there other ways to look at this? And can we figure this out together?
I like it. I'm going to start using that one. So you've been talking a lot about South Africa. How were you able to get all of these different sides to come together?
I don't want to be misunderstood as that my experiences only in South Africa are only applicable to these history-changing events. I've worked in 50 countries, including my home country of Canada and a lot in the United States and every other part of the world. And it hasn't always been in revolutionary contexts. It's been in many ordinary situations of organizations or communities or health or education, whatever. But the way you ask the question is, in fact, one of the things that I think is most important in what I've learned. And I'm picking on the phrase you used because 100% of the time people ask me a question like that, and they use exactly the words you did. How do you get them to? And the short answer is, I have no success getting anybody to do anything, really. And this is for me a big principle because I've learned the hard way that I can't get South Africans to do things. I can't get Dorothy to do things. I can't get my grandchildren to do things. I can't get my employees to do things. So in a way, the most fundamental thing I'm saying in my book and in my work is, what do you do when you can't get people to do what you want them to do? And I'll answer your question about South Africa, and then I'll come back to what I think is the larger principle here. So in South Africa, the conflict between the apartheid regime and the Black majority, or you could say between supporters of the government and opponents of the government, have been going on for decades, if not centuries. It was a long, it was a situation that had been stuck for a long time, and so lots of people were trying to figure out how to get it unstuck, and they had tried lots of things, from police repression to revolutionary activity to international boycotts to cultural and sports boycotts to marches in the streets of Johannesburg and Washington, D.C. So people had tried lots of things, and it was starting to move through things I wasn't involved in, including secret negotiations with Mandela, etc. So the point was, when I entered this situation, a group of people had already decided that what they were doing wasn't working, and they wanted to try something else. And just by coincidence, the method they wanted to use, try something else, was this shell scenario planning method that I was an expert in. But the general principle that, as a facilitator, as somebody whose job is to help people move forward together, you can't get them to do anything. And the main thing I'm looking out for is, have people already figured out that they need to work together, even if they wish they didn't have to, even if they wish they could just have things the way they want them to be? Have they already figured out that they need to at least try to collaborate? Once they've reached that point, then there's lots of things I can do to be helpful. And that's what the book's about. So the other way to say this, Rocky, is in the book you will have seen that 4 years ago in 2017, after doing this work for almost 30 years, I was in Colombia. To make a long story short, I was in Colombia 1 year after the signing of the peace accords, and I was in a workshop in a rural area of people who were trying to figure out how are we going to rebuild this area now that the war has ended. And a participant in the workshop, a very famous peacemaker Jesuit priest named Pacho de Rue, came running up to me after the day, first day of the workshop, and said, "Adam, I see what you're doing." I said, "Well, Pacho, what am I doing?" I knew him, and I have a lot of respect for him, so I was listening carefully. He said, "You are removing the obstacles to the expression of the mystery." So anyway, I didn't understand what he meant. I've spent 4 years trying to unpack that one sentence. The whole book was inspired by that one sentence. But the relevance of that one sentence to the question you asked is, I think that's the fork in the road. The thing to do if you can't get people to do things is to remove the obstacles to them doing what they need to do. And all I did in South Africa was organize the flip charts and the chairs and the agenda such that the South Africans could talk to each other and figure out a way forward together. That was my role. I didn't get them to do anything, but I was very skillful because of what I talked about, my particular orientation, my gifts, etc. I succeeded in removing the obstacles to them talking about the things they needed to talk about and meeting each other and starting to work together and sketching out a way forward for the country out of its extraordinary polarization and stuckness and violence.
And thank you for that. And I appreciate that expounding on all of that. Today's episode is sponsored by Profit Answer Man Podcast. Did you know that most small business owners hate looking at their financials? It's one reason they may struggle with business success. The Profit Answer Man podcast helps them ensure they are profitable and can pay their employees and weather the storms we all have to face. It's built on the Profit First methodology of pay yourself first. The Profit Answer Man podcast is a must listen to for every small business owner and anyone who wants to help them survive and thrive. Check it out on your favorite listening platform. Speaking of Colombia, there was a quote in the book that I very much enjoyed. I guess it was in Bogota, and you say you referred to the project because it's where I learned that contrary to, and actually this is someone else speaking to you, and they said, it's because I learned that contrary to all my upbringing, it's possible to work with people you do not agree with and will never agree with.
Yeah.
And that's kind of I think a big part of it, right? Is understanding, as you said, that we need to work together and we may not agree and we may never agree.
So that for me that was a big learning for me. The person who said that is Juan Manuel Santos, who I've worked with a little bit for many years in Colombia, and from 2010 to 2018, he was the president of Colombia, and he succeeded in negotiating an end to the 52-year civil war, and he won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2016. And we had worked together 30 years earlier on a little project based on the South African project. In fact, Nelson Mandela had advised Santos to do this same thing that I have been involved in South Africa. And so that's how I got involved in Colombia. And what surprised me is that the day Santos won the Nobel Peace Prize, his office, the office of the presidency, put out this press release about, biographical press release saying how pleased he was to have gotten the prize and giving a bit of the history of his work. And it says in this press release that the work that I had done with him 20 years before in 1996 had been an important step on the road to peace. And so I was delighted with this. Of course, I immediately, made sure it was on the Reos Partners website. But I didn't understand, why did he say that? Why did he think that these 10 days of workshops we'd had 20 years earlier have been important? So many bigger things had happened. United Nations missions, billions of dollars of U.S. military aid. He himself had been Minister of Defense, 5 years of negotiations with the guerillas and FARC. Why did he refer to these workshops 20 years before? And that was the question I asked him. Why did he keep referring to these workshops? The project was called Destino Colombia. And that was the answer he gave. He says, I always remember Destino Colombia because that's where I learned that, contrary to all of my political and family and cultural upbringing, it is possible to work with people we do not agree with and will never agree with. And the reason I think this is so important is because most of us imagine that, we're going to meet these people and we're going to have a chat and a drink together. And we're going to find out it was all a terrible misunderstanding. And actually, we are on the same side. We do agree. And maybe that happens. Sometimes that happens. But I think Santos is saying something more important and more common. We may find that, we agree on some things, but there's some things we do not agree on and will never agree on. But we still have to live together. And so that's the thing that interests me. How do we find a way of working and living and moving forward with diverse others, including people we don't agree with or like or trust? It's interesting. In English, the word for that is coexistence, where that's the most commonly used word in the peace literature. They talk about coexistence. But in Spanish, they use a slightly different word. They use convivencia, living together. It's the same word you use for a couple living together. And I like that convivencia because, if you if you live with somebody, whether it's a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a spouse or a partner or kids, it's not that it's solved once and for all. A marriage doesn't have a solution. You have to find a way, or you have to try to find a way to live together in spite of similarities, differences, agreements, conflicts. And that's what I think people need to understand. And interestingly enough, politicians get this. They know that there's going to be differences and we have to try to figure out a way anyway. But I think the rest of us often think, no. If I don't agree with this person, I just can't work with them. How could I ever get into know with them? We don't agree. Well, that's nonsense.
This kind of reminds me of how things used to be. I guess we're going back 150 years or more. During the Civil War, the Confederates in the North, they would still come together at an event, and the officers from both sides would dance together.
Really?
Yes.
Really? Oh, I didn't know that.
And even at like the Battle of Gettysburg, right? There were these battles that occurred, and there was only certain streams for water. And in the evening, both sets of soldiers would come down and drink the water.
Really?
And fill their canteens. And then they would go back to fighting the next morning. It was civility. Like, we may not love each other and we may disagree, but there's civility in how we treat each other in society. And I think that is something that has probably disappeared, is that civility. Because even going back to probably the 90s, the politicians on both sides of the aisle would argue all day and go have a beer at night. Today, I think they're prevented from doing that by their leadership, unfortunately. I think they would do it if allowed, but the political pressure prevents that from happening, which is probably why we have half the problems we have these days.
Well, as a Canadian, I'm not really authorized to comment on U.S. politics, but you are raising something that I think about a lot, and I see in the US and in Canada and lots of places around the world, which is this move from I have a different opinion. You see things differently from me. We disagree. You're wrong. You're bad. You're the devil. And if you're the devil, well, of course I can't work with you. How could you work with the devil? So I call this demonization. And I think people move pretty often and pretty quickly from we have a difference of opinion to you're the devil. So I don't know if that's the same as civility. Maybe the other angle on this is, yes, there are places we agree and places we disagree, even on very big things. But we have agreement on the rules of the game. And that's the part that I find alarming is the throwing out of the rules of the game. And I suppose, I don't know anything about the American Civil War, but I suppose one of the rules of the game is you can kill people in the battle in daylight, but when you're at the stream, you can't. So what are the rules of the game that maybe we will still fight? Maybe we will try to defeat each other, or even in the extreme case, to kill each other. But there are some rules, and that's important, I think.
It is, and we all need to have that common agreement, at least on the rules, regardless of how we feel. So let's kind of get to the book. What inspired you to write the book, Facilitating Breakthrough: How to Remove Obstacles, Bridge Differences, and Move Forward?
Well, the inspiration as such for the book was that one sentence of Pacho de Rue, you're removing the obstacles, the expression, the mystery. So I've been facilitating for 30 years, and I thought he was giving me a clue to a different way of understanding this. But the purpose of the book, the reason the book exists, is that I think the world needs more and better collaboration. In other words, it's exactly the opposite of what we were talking about 1 minute ago. There's a choice between, I think John Powell calls it, between bridging and breaking. There's a choice between demonization and collaboration. And I'm on the side of collaboration. And so the argument, I think the world needs more and better collaboration, whether that's in the US Congress or your suburb or your organization or the climate change negotiations happening next month in Glasgow. The world needs more and better collaboration. And the word I use for somebody who helps people collaborate to create change is a facilitator. And so the world needs more and better collaboration, and therefore the world needs more and better facilitation. And the reason I wrote this book was to provide a handbook for people who want to play that role, whether it is in in civil wars in Colombia or in their office or in their neighborhood or in their family. It's the same stuff. People trying to move forward, to find a way to deal with the issues they're dealing with and to move forward together. So I'm not saying a facilitator is a profession or a full-time job. It's a role that you can play in your family, in your community, in your organization, as a leader, a manager, a team member, a consultant, a coach, a friend, whatever. And so, yeah, the book is about how to do that. It's a theory and practice of facilitation. It's a very structured book that has, 10 moves that you have to make. And I'm not offering a new way of facilitating. I think all good facilitators do something like what I'm describing, but I am offering a new and I think clearer way of understanding. If facilitation is not about getting people to do things, manipulating them, if it's about removing the obstacles to moving forward together, what exactly do you have to do? And that's what the book is.
So what is the single greatest challenge that facilitators face? This goes back to the quote, though, that we talked about earlier when you were at Shell. People think they're paying attention, right?
Exactly.
But we're filtering everything. So it's paying attention without a filter and truly understanding what somebody is saying.
Well, I mean, we all have filters. Kees van der Heijden was an exceptional listener, and on good days, I am half of what he was. So we all have filters, but the book says there's only 10 things you have to do as a facilitator. It's not 1,000,000. It's not 1,000. I don't know whether it's 14 or 8, but anyhow, I say 10. It's like if I came to your kitchen and I put on the counter, here's some flour, here's some eggs, here's some meat, here's some chocolate, here's some cayenne pepper, here's some carrots. Now you've got all the ingredients. You can make anything you want with that. Now, if you're a useless cook like me, you would just look at these ingredients. You wouldn't have any idea what to do. If you're a skilled cook, you'd say, great, wow, I can cook 15 things out of this. So the book says there's only 10 ingredients to facilitation, 10 moves, but I can't tell you in what order or what proportion or when to use each. The answer of when to do what is to pay attention. And yes, the reason paying attention is difficult is because we get distracted. I get distracted by this other project I'm working on, or this email I just got, or my fear that the client doesn't like me and is going to kick me out, or this participant reminds me of my grandmother and that's freaking me out a little bit, or I didn't sleep well last night, or I'm thinking about this facilitation book I read rather than what is happening right now. So yes, the single most important thing is for the facilitator or facilitators to pay attention, to not get distracted, pay attention to what's going on in the situation, in the context, in the group, in themselves. The most frequent thing I tell junior facilitators is stop looking at your phone. And in a way, Zoom world is worse because now we're distracted by all these other things on our screen. It's simple, but not easy. It's simple. There's only 10 moves, but it's not easy because you have to pay attention and decide at this moment, what's the move I have to make? Because that's all that matters. The only thing that matters is not what somebody else is doing, not what I should have done yesterday, not what I'm going to do tomorrow, but what am I going to do next? That's all that matters.
Do you have any tips for how to pay attention in the moment? Because we are, as you mentioned, a very distracted society.
Well, yes, I do have a tip. I'm not a big meditator, but when you learn meditation, they tell you to, or at least some schools of meditation tell you to pay attention to your breath. And it's quite hard to do, actually, pay attention to your breath without getting distracted. And after 2 breaths or after 5 or after 50, you start thinking of something else. And the instruction at that point is don't panic, don't beat yourself up, don't be upset, don't quit. Just bring your attention back to your breathing. So I think that's the lesson. When you find yourself distracted, say, oh, I'm distracted, and bring your attention back to what you're supposed to be paying attention to. And I judge my maturation as a facilitator, not that I don't get distracted or upset or thrown off course, but I can bring myself back more quickly. Things that happened to me that 10 years ago would cause me to sulk for 6 months. Now I only sulk for a month. And things that really used to throw me off for a day, I can get back on track in an hour. And places where I used to get confused for 10 minutes, I can get back on track in a few seconds. So, yeah, when you find yourself distracted, bring your attention back to the situation. What's going on? Sorry, lost my attention. What's going on? What were we saying here? What's happening here? What do I need to do next?
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's very helpful. So this may sound like it almost sounds like a strange question, but What does love have to do with all of this?
What's love got to do with it? You didn't ask me to sing the song. It was a serious question. So my day job is working as facilitator in the situations I mentioned, but every few years I step back and try to say, what have I learned from this, and how can I explain it most simply? And I have come to the view, which is the conclusion of this new book, that the essence, when you say you're removing obstacles to the expression of mystery, what are you removing obstacles to? You're removing obstacles to love, power, and justice. And of course, these are very common words that have many different definitions. I'm using them in a particular way. And what I'm saying doesn't really make much sense unless you understand the way I'm using it. But the way I'm using the word love is not in the romantic sense, but what one philosopher, Paul Tillich, called the drive of everything living, the drive to reunite the separated. And so if you have a community or an organization that's been fighting with each other in different camps, kept apart, the Afrikaans word apartheid just means apartness, so an extreme case of apartness, then the love move, or the drive to love, is the drive to reunite that which has been fractured. And what I've noticed in the work I've done is when a system has been fractured, whether it's a family that's been having a feud, or marketing is upset with production, or two political parties have been kept apart, or whatever. When people are able to come together, they are so happy and so relieved. It's not easy. It's not foolproof. It's not straightforward. But I consider that drive to reunite the separated to be, well, it's the first move of a facilitator. Now, it's not the only move. It's not true that all you need is love. We also need to work with what I call power and what I call justice. But that drive to not be, it's like, it's that drive to not to be the same, but to recognize how we're part of something with others is, I think, a drive that almost everybody has. There's many obstacles to it, political and psychological and familial and economic and class and race obstacles. But if you can remove those obstacles, people are so happy. And so that's what love's got to do with it.
And thank you for sharing. And I think it's important that people realize that. And, at the end of the day, we're all humans. You have to figure out how to get along with each other and how to stop fighting, because it's just lost time when all you do is fight. And instead, you could enjoy life.
Yeah.
Sounds so simple, but simple isn't always easy, is it?
Right. Well, and maybe we do have to fight sometimes, but that doesn't mean we have to fight all the time to the death. That's not the world I want to live in. So we're allowed to disagree and to argue and to fight, but we have to do more than that. We have to live together, convivencia.
You've done a ton of facilitation. Is there one that's maybe more your favorite that you haven't already mentioned yet?
A favorite story or?
Favorite story of facilitation, yes.
Well, I have a funny idea of favorite, in that my favorite stories are the stories where I thought I knew what was going on, and that isn't what was going on, and I banged my head and fell down. And eventually I picked myself up and went, what happened here? And I learned something, and then I write it down. And my book is just one long series it's just a series of stories about things like that, about mistakes. But even though they're often painful, I really love that learning. So So I guess the one story briefly, which is the last story in this book, is the story about coming back to Canada after many decades of facilitating in other people's countries and thinking I was a big expert and starting a meeting with a group of Native Canadians, First Nations leaders, and having one of them say to me within 5 minutes, "I don't trust you," and realizing, to make a long story short, that I wasn't outside of the issue. In their view, I was part of the issue. That the fact that white people come from far away and think they know everything and want to tell First Nations people what they ought to do, which is what I was doing at that moment, was not the active outsider. That was exactly the problem they were trying to fix. So anyhow, I learned something very profound there about how a facilitator has to not only be from the outside, but has to recognize the way they're from the inside. And that's a hugely important lesson, because it's very challenging for those of us who like being helpful outsiders. But the book is full of stories like that, mostly of big boo-boos and what I learned from them.
And I always say we can learn from our mistakes or we can learn from somebody else's. So I prefer to learn from others.
Well, if I was smarter, I would learn from others, but I'm afraid I only learn the hard way. So,
based on our conversation, what's one action step people can take this week to move forward in their life?
Well, I think we covered it early on in the conversation. It's to pay attention to, when am I not listening? When am I just waiting for this other person's mouth to stop moving so that I can go back to telling them the truth about the way things are? And just suspend your thinking and see if you might learn something. You might not. You might still think the same thing. But the single most powerful move is to move from not listening to listening. And that's something any of us can do in the next hour, wherever we are.
And I think that's an excellent idea for us to practice. It's time to learn the secrets of life. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
An abundant life. Well, I get a good night's sleep. That's, I think, the most important thing of all. Work hard and sleep well.
I'm surprised at how many people don't sleep well or don't sleep enough. I guess it's a big problem.
I guess so. When I don't sleep well, doesn't the next day is not a good one. So that's what I focus on.
So one of the gifts I have is usually within less than 10 minutes of my head hitting the pillow, I'm done and out. And it takes a lot to wake me up. I sleep like a log. What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
Well, I think I'm understanding better than I did 5 years ago the way in which what I notice and pay attention to and think is real in the world has a lot to do with where I'm sitting and with my privilege in many the ways I'm privileged in many obvious dimensions: white, middle class, Canadian, male, etc. And I wish I'd realized sooner what big blind spots I have.
Everybody looks at life through their lens. And while that's fine for you, it doesn't show you the whole picture. Mm-hmm. And when we put on other lenses, we start to see things that were blurry before. That we didn't truly understand. If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom what would it be?
Yeah. Well, trying to figure out what to say to my 19-year-old grandson. So it's not a completely theoretical question. I don't know. I guess I would say that I'm full of advice I want to give him about life and money and careers and university and all of that. But I think what's actually important is that I take my own medicine and make an effort to listen first before I tell people the truth about life is.
And that's one of the biggest things I've learned with kids is to be on their level and seeing it through their eyes. Because many times we don't. We see it through our vision, and that's not where they are at. We just recently had an episode number 254 with Greg and Beth Langston, and literally that's what they do. They sit with our kids and they help them figure this all out. And when they're done, they deliver the kid comes to the parent and says, these are my strengths. This is what I like. This is my plan. This is what I'm doing. Here is where I'm going. So it's quite powerful. And to be able to do that at 18, wow, you waited till 30. It took me so much later. And I just think that that is amazing. If people would like to learn more about you, the book, where is the best place for them to find out more?
The book is available everywhere, I guess. Not quite piled up in airports, but everywhere else. So this is in the book. The organization I'm part of is called Reos Partners, REOS Partners. So you can go to www.reospartners.com, and that has information on the book and free downloads and about this work that my colleagues and I are doing, out of which I have learned the lessons I shared.
Awesome. And we will make sure that those are in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Rocky. It was a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it.
How often do you listen to understand? Do you do it without filtering what you've heard? It's a tough skill to master, and I have to admit, I need to work on it. Too often I want to say something before they're even done speaking. I love this whole concept of in my opinion. It really takes the edge off and allows others to hold to their beliefs as well. It creates a conversation and a discussion instead of people taking their sides. I'm going to work on this in 2022. Please hold me accountable. Imagine having to bring together the people that Adam did. It sure makes it easy to think about bringing together our family or coworkers. There's many strategies in the book, so check it out. Maybe it's one to add to your reading list. This week's action step was to pay attention to when you're not listening and waiting to respond. Most often we filter what others say. Let's try to move towards hearing and being focused on what the person is saying without putting our beliefs and filters onto what they are saying. That's pretty powerful. As I said, I'm going to practice this as well. It's high on my list of goals for 2022. Next week, we've got on Nicole Jansen to talk about transformation. It's life-changing. Hey, if you know someone who would benefit from today's episode, would you do me a favor and share it? I'd appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.